Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar tonight. I am just going to let you know we're having a couple of technical issues. I'm going to share my screen here a second so I can, because you guys are you're not seeing anything yet. Hang on. One second. There we go. You should be able to see my screen now. All right, I have to do one quick thing to get David up and running with us. And let me see here. All right, 1 second. And then we'll be off and running. Just be patient.
No idea.
Okay.
I've used multiple webinar things. So.
Yeah. Okay, hey everybody. So David is getting logged in. We're having a little bit of difficulty for this, so I'm just going to ask people to be patient and kind of stick with us. We will get this sorted out. We are almost there. All right, it looks like Laura says you're in. I've got somebody.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in. It says in progress.
Okay,
But
so
the thing that says literacy development, all I've got is a little rectangle that says processing, and it keeps working on processing,
oh, weird.
but it's not allowing me to select it.
Oh, that's weird. So down, you don't have another program at the bottom of your screen open? Sorry, guys, we're
Another program, meaning what?
like there's like a little blue icon.
So the one you called my invitation didn't.
All right, everybody, stick with us. He's almost got it. We're going to be ready to go. I apologize, little technical difficulties. Stick with us. It's going to be okay. All right. Well, let me go ahead and get introductions out of the way while David finishes downloading in the background here. So let me go back here a second. Got all kinds of windows open and all kinds of stuff going on. I apologize, guys. All right. So anyways, tonight, this is our Ask the Expert Education edition. We're going to talk about literacy tonight. We are being joined by Dr. David Koppenhaver, who is a professor of education and reading education and special education at Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina. David is also a co-founder of the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies at UNC Chapel Hill. What's really exciting is David is doing some research right now on Williams syndrome. I had the privilege of meeting David a couple of, I guess maybe it's been 3 years ago, maybe it's been 4 years ago now, at ATIA, which is an Assistive Technology Industry Association conference in Orlando, Florida. And many of you that know me, my name is Robin Pegg. I'm the educational consultant for the Williams Syndrome Association, if you're the first time joining one of these calls. And so those of you that do know me, you know that I'm really nerdy. I love technology. I love curriculum, and I'll do anything I can to find just the right gadget or just the right thing that a kid needs to do their schoolwork. So I was at that conference and I had the opportunity to listen to David speak, and I was just floored. I was absolutely floored by what he was sharing. about literacy development. And I walked up to him after the presentation and I said, I have some people you need to meet. They have Williams syndrome. And that has led to, I have to say, an amazing friendship. And it's also led to this research, which is super exciting. So I just want to make sure that we're all set here.
So can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, I'm connected then.
That's fantastic. All right. And you're not on my phone anymore. You hung up, right? Yeah. Okay, awesome. This is fantastic. And Laura says she can hear you too. That's good. See, I have like backup friends for backup here. Great. All right. So anyways, we're just going to welcome you here tonight. David is going to talk about his literacy research. And I just want to preface this whole presentation with sort of an introduction. So with Williams syndrome, we have some really amazing researchers out there doing some wonderful work. One of the largest studies that's being done right now on Williams syndrome around cognitive functioning and language functioning is done by Dr. Carolyn Mervis at the University of Louisville. It's highly highly valued research by our community. Dr. Mervis has been absolutely integral in helping to guide the ship and help people understand what kind of instruction works for our kids, where to start, things like that. And what David is going to share with you is sort of what that next part of that is. So picture it this way. I guess this is how I want to introduce it. So Dr. Mervis is a psychologist, and so she is looking at things through that lens of the psychology lens, and that sort of testing and analysis. And when I go out and work with kids, I'm not a researcher. That's not what I do. I work in classrooms. I look at, how can I get this kid to do that task? Somewhere in the middle between that really cognitive based research that Dr. Mervis is doing that provides this like foundation and the really practical strategies that I do when I work in classrooms is something that we would call, curriculum and teaching strategies. And these are the methods that teachers need to use specifically to teach kids. So what we do is we take this foundational information that Dr. Mervis has put together over multitudes of years with multitudes of kids. I mean, she has an N, I don't know, I think it's got to be like 1,000 or plus nowadays. I don't know. I'll have to ask that number. But so Dr. Mervis has been doing this stuff, but what we haven't had in our Williams syndrome community and what David is beginning to provide us is what's the roadmap? What can we give teachers? What can we tell teachers to do to teach our kids? And that's in a multitude of ways in a classroom. What does reading instruction, specific reading instruction, need to look like for our kids? So that's the layer that David is he's sort of fleshing out with his research and with his experiences with the kids. So tonight, you're going to hear David talk about several things related to literacy, not just phonics. He's going to talk about lots of pieces in and around literacy. And so what I want you guys to understand is what David's saying, it's not discounting what Dr. Mervis has done, not by any stretch of the imagination. The profile that Dr. Mervis has provided us with all of her years of research has been an essential foundation to the work that we're doing. What we're doing now is layering more information on top of that. All right. I just want to preface this whole conversation with that. I don't want people leaving tonight's webinar going, well, this person said this, what Dr. Mervis says isn't right. That's not true. That's not true at all. These two things complement each other, and I just want to make sure that that is stated, okay, very clearly. All right, well, I'm going to turn things over to David. And David, you can just tell me to change slides. So I'll, be happy to drive the bus over here, and off we go. Okay. At the end of this, we did have a few people submit some questions. So if there's time, David will go through and answer those. So throughout things, if you guys have questions, you can either raise your hand or answer questions. And as we have breaks in things and we'll have some time to do that, we'll go ahead and do that. All right, David, it's all you.
All right. So first of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Go to the next slide if you could, Robin.
Mhm.
Right, so just quick background. I've met some of you at 2 different summer camps in Michigan, and I've met some of you in Baltimore at that conference. And beyond that, most of you probably don't know me from the Man on the Moon. I helped create a place called the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies. It still exists at UNC Chapel Hill. It's directed by Karen Erickson, who was a student of mine when we worked there. She now is very well established in running that center. I teach at Appalachian State in a reading education, special education combined program. And so I have a long history in disabilities and literacy. I have a short history in Williams syndrome and literacy. And so I would just echo what Robin said and say, most of what I have to say is tentative. Next slide. My colleagues and I come at literacy in this way, and that is, we believe that no one is to anything, to cognitively disabled, to sensory disabled, to physically disabled, fill in the blank with the disability of your choice. We don't think it matters in learning to read and write. So we believe everybody can learn to read, write, and communicate, but it requires that we're thoughtful as instructors and as people supporting that learning. Next slide. Right, so let's talk about what my colleagues and I are beginning to find out. And I would say beginning. Next slide. Right, this is from a couple of days ago. We have started doing online reading assessments. And there's a link in the handout for this presentation and on one of the slides. And if you would like to participate in that study with your child. What we're doing is conducting an informal reading assessment online. We're using a tool called the Johns Reading Inventory. We're using our own process with that, which was developed over the about last 10 to 15 years, working with a variety of populations of kids with disabilities. What we're finding, let me just interpret the numbers that are in front of you. So far, we have assessed 9 children K5. We've assessed 5 children in middle school, 12 children in high school, and then 2 others who are adults, and I'm not going to talk about those right now. And so 26 total, a very small number compared to the previous study that Robin mentioned. However, in that small number, we're getting a very diverse profile. And so among the kids who are in that elementary range, K5, on average, those children are reading less than a first grade level in words, barely reading with comprehension, and understanding text at about a first grade level that's read to them. And that's 3 students in each of those categories. And so what we're doing with this assessment is trying to figure out greatest need. And among those children, elementary children so far, print processing, the ability to read connected text with understanding is the greatest need, not language comprehension, not word identification. It's not to say those things are unimportant. We would expect everything gets taught to every child, but when we're looking at intervention, as distinguished from instruction, intervention needs to address what kids need most if you're going to efficiently make progress. Among the middle grade students, we don't currently have any students, there are only 5 total, but we don't have any where word identification has been the greatest need. On average, those middle schoolers are reading words at about a 3rd grade level. They're reading text with understanding at about a 2nd grade level. and they're understanding text that's read to them at slightly less than a second grade level. And so those children are sorting out into print processing needs and language comprehension needs. Among the high school students, 12 of those so far, average reading level is about 4.2, so fourth grade, just above. Their ability to read text independently with understanding is just above a second grade level. Their ability to understand text that we read to them is about mid third grade level. And there's a distribution across those. So just in a nutshell, what we're finding is not that there's going to be a singular solution to how we teach your children to read. I'm going to propose that diagnostic reading assessment, which has a long history in my field, reading education, diagnostic reading assessment is how we figure out what kids need. If we then fine tune instruction to be generally good, broad reading instruction, generally for about an hour and a half to 2 hours a day. If we then add on to that, in most cases, that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 minutes of intervention focused on something. We would propose focusing it on the greatest need of the child. And so we can't look at Williams syndrome and say, oh, well, they're going to be word identification problems, or, oh, they're going to be silent reading problems, or, right, what we're finding is they don't read very well compared to non-disabled peers, but they do read, and they do read with understanding. And that's a lot different than most populations I've worked with over time. The difference, however, is if we want to help them move forward more efficiently, we've got to figure out that greatest need and try to address it more efficiently. Next slide. All right, so this is just the information. If you have not yet signed up and you're interested in contributing to that process of trying to figure out what your kids need, there's a phone number here, there's an email. Sydney Shadrick, many of you met at camp or at that Baltimore conference, is an undergraduate student in special education who's about to enter our master's program in reading and has been working with me since we started this work. And this is how you could help contribute to our figuring out some of this. Next slide.
Oh, we should mention that we'd love to have more boys.
Yeah, we'd love to have more people, but
love
boys,
to have more
especially.
boys.
All right, so let's talk about what reading instruction might look like. Next page, slide. My colleagues and I asked 4 very simple questions when we're trying to figure out the nature of instruction. Does the student that we're concerned with know most of the letters most of the time? If you do your math in your head, there's 26 letters of the alphabet. Most of them, most of the time, means 14 or more letters, and I don't care if they're capital letters or lowercase or some combination. If they know most of the letters, we give them a yes. We're mean assessors, I'll say this in general. When in doubt, the answer is no, because it's not a problem to falsely assume that a child is performing lower than they actually can. It is a huge problem to assume that a child can perform better than they actually can. And so we don't mind being wrong on the side of providing a child with easy, successful, language-rich experiences and finding out that our assessment was wrong and moving them up. We worry about putting kids in tasks and texts that are too difficult and contributing then to lower self-esteem, less achievement, a frustrating experience for teachers, parents, and kids. And so we're mean assessors and we're nice teachers. The second question we ask is, are they engaged actively during shared reading? That is, when we read stories with them, are they looking at the book? Are they talking with us about it? Or are they the kid that we've got to grab by the belt as they walk away? Or are they the kid who will tear a book up? Or are they the kid who tears up when books are introduced in the environment? All kinds of things that would say, we're not actively engaged yet. Do they have a means of communication interaction? In the case of nearly every child in your population, certainly everyone I've met so far, the answer is yes to that one. They can talk. I work with lots of populations that use augmentative communication. Often those children are still learning how to communicate with technology, and so we don't always have a yes for this question. And then the fourth and final question is, do they understand that when you do writing, you use letters and words? Not can they spell, not can they write something you can read, but do they understand when you ask them to write, they're gonna make some letter-like shapes, or they're going to write some letters, or they're going to type on the keyboard and not randomly hit the number keys and the symbol keys, but actually type letters. If you have 4 yeses, then what we do is what we call comprehensive conventional literacy instruction. We do guided reading, in which we teach children how to understand text, increasingly wider variety of text, increasingly more difficult text over time, and to do that increasingly independently. We teach kids how to figure out words. So we teach them both sight words and how to figure out words you don't already know. I'll talk about a method that we use for that, that I think might be one to consider for this population. But we do that so that kids can independently and efficiently, when they're reading text, figure out the words. If they have to put too much attention to that, comprehension suffers. The third thing that we do is we help kids learn how to write. Writing is a powerful form of communication and gets a lot of things done these days, particularly online. But it also is a primary way that many older children in many populations have learned how to read, who were poor readers at older ages relative to non-disabled peers. And then the final thing is we work on independent reading. We do that for a really important reason. If all we're doing is teaching children how to read and not giving them any reason to do it, then we've lost the battle. Anything that we do in instruction or intervention is a piano lesson model. That is, we're providing a certain amount of experience for a very short, relative to life period of time. And if children don't choose to read when they don't have to, they're not going to get much better at reading no matter what we do. All right, so if we get 1 or more no's, we go to the left-hand side of that model, and we look at shared reading, which is different than guided reading. Shared reading is about trying to increase children's engagement, trying to increase their interaction, try to increase their oral language, particularly comprehension. We're looking at predictable chart writing, which many of you may know as shared writing. We do that in a fairly structured way, but we create text that is predictable around interests that the children have and use it as a way to teach how print works, that it goes left to right, that a word is a bunch of squiggles with white space on both sides, certain letters of the alphabet, etc. We can work on skills during predictable chart writing in an engaging and repetitive way, but repetition with lots and lots of variety, which is what's required if children are going to learn. We teach alphabet to those children who don't already know it. We teach awareness of sounds in words, phonological awareness, and we do those in interesting and engaging ways. We do not use any of the commercial programs we've found so far because they do a lot of things to distract children from the letter, name, shape, and sound, and we don't want that. We just don't want kids tapping and sweeping and making hand gestures. We want them focused on print when we teach those things. Fourth thing, we teach independent writing, and we give children access to independent writing if they have any physical impairments, or in the case of some children with Williams syndrome, fine motor issues that prevent effective use of a pencil. Writing just means putting print to paper, and so a keyboard is reasonable. Voice input is reasonable. Speech to text is reasonable. Assistive technology can be used for writing. We're not talking about the act of handwriting. We're talking about learning to put meaning on paper. And then independent reading. We know they can independently read or write if they're qualified, if we decided they're emergent, but if we don't provide those experiences, we don't know what they can do without our help, and we don't know what to teach as effectively. So independent writing, independent reading on a daily basis allow us to see how kids are doing with the instruction we're providing and learn what to teach next to help them keep moving forward. Next slide. Robin, you'll have to advise me. Do we have classroom teachers in the mix tonight?
I don't think so. I think it's all parents.
Okay, so we'll skip this slide. This is what you would do with those questions if you had a combined class. You had some children who are emergent, some who are conventional. We've also talked about this on our website.
Oh, David, I am standing corrected. I've got a couple of parents of kids with WS that are also classroom teachers. And
Okay.
we have a couple of people on the call that are homeschoolers. So,
all right, let me explain briefly then. So when you have a mixed class, you essentially have to teach both emergent and conventional. We suggest doing it this way. And that is, so if every kid is emergent that you're working with in your homeschool or your classroom, then teach them emergent. Or if they're all conventional, teach them conventional. Most classrooms end up with a mix, in my experience, when we're working with kids who have disabilities. I'm guessing that Williams syndrome, at least at early ages, is like this if they're receiving their reading instruction outside of a mainstream classroom. And so when you get that mix, then every kid gets shared reading. It doesn't hurt anybody. The kids who are conventional don't need it, but they're not hurt by it. They have an enjoyable reading experience. They get to talk, and they're wonderful models for the emergent kids. Only the conventional kids get the guided reading instruction. So during the guided reading instruction, we often have aides or volunteers doing more shared reading with the emergent kids while the teacher is doing guided reading with the conventional kids. We do alphabet and phonological awareness during 2 times a day when we're doing word walls to teach sight words and when we're teaching a strategy called making words. Rather than working on spelling, those children are working on letters and sounds. The emergent kids. The conventional kids are learning sight words and learning how to decode and spell. Predictable chart writing, everybody does it on Monday when we create the chart, but only the emergent kids do the Tuesday through Friday activities where they're working with the chart to learn how to spell or how to what a word is, or other kinds of things that we can teach in that 4 days following Monday. During that time, then, if the teacher's working on predictable chart writing, either volunteers are teaching something else with the conventional kids, or it becomes additional time for writing or independent reading. Writing instruction, only the conventional kids get, but during writing instruction, our emergent kids can be writing. So we're just getting them putting print to paper and helping them feel good about it and building on that initial attempt. Conventional kids, we're teaching them how to do it better. And then independent reading, everybody does. Emergent kids can't do it, but we're watching their non-conventional attempts and figuring out what it is we need to do to support them in becoming more independent. All right, that was really quick. Next slide. All right, so school age kids with Williams syndrome, some things that, at least in this early data, we're thinking would be logical ways to approach instruction. Next slide. All right, so if we have emergent literacy, we've got kids who have 1 or more no's, then the activities that we would call comprehensive emergent literacy, I just talked about. Next slide. With shared reading, our goal is to increase engagement, interaction, kids' initiations, and language comprehension. You cannot do that by asking WH questions. So we do everything in our power, and we videotape ourselves often, and we smack ourselves and are really frustrated when we find ourselves repeatedly asking WH questions, because it's just sort of how we think kids learn. And the language learning literature is really clear. The more WH questions we ask, the less kids learn about language. So we try to restructure that interaction, and we use this CAR structure, this acronym, to try and remember what it is we're trying to do page by page. So we open a book to page 1 or the title page, and we make a comment. Oh, look, there's a comment. Or I say, oh, look, there's a baseball, and I wait. And in that silence is an implied invitation for a child to say something. Human beings are uncomfortable with silence, and often just by waiting, kids begin to interact. And that's what we'd like. If they don't, then we ask, but we don't ask a question. We ask in the sense of inviting. If I had said, look, on the first page and got nothing, then the next thing I might do is point to what I want them to look at and repeat, look, and with more emphasis and with a point, or look at this tree, or look at this something. And then I wait 5 to 10 seconds. Our experience is that some kids take a little while. I'm guessing in your population that it's not going to take 10 seconds, but it might for kids who are used to being asked WH questions and are afraid that when they take a turn, they're going to be wrong. And you have to get past that. They have to learn this is an interaction. Now, if I don't get anything after the comment and I don't get anything after the invitation, then I respond by saying what they might have said. look, they're playing baseball. Let's see. I bet this book is about playing baseball. Let's find out. And we turn the page. If they say something, for instance, they say, oh, I like baseball. When I say, look, then I say, oh, me too. I love baseball. This is a story about baseball. Let's see what they're going to tell us. And I go in, right? So each response, either the response is a model of what they might have said, or it's an expansion of what they did say. So comment, ask, respond. The hardest thing for people to do is wait. We don't keep waiting if kids talk. We then interact with them. But if they don't say anything, we have to wait to give them that opportunity. Down at the bottom is a link to an online free module from the Dynamic Learning Maps project, and it will walk you through, excuse me. I'm an old man, I lose my voice at night. All right, it'll just walk you through the steps. Next page. All right, predictable charts. What we're trying to do is increase what's called print awareness, children's awareness that we're reading the squiggles on the page, that we're not reading the pictures, we're not in somehow making up a story. There's sort of developmental ways that people think, kids think about learning to read, but that we're actually reading those squiggles. We're trying to increase sight words, but not in any direct way, certainly not with flashcards, by using them repeatedly with variety. And then we're trying to help kids understand what reading feels like before they can actually do it. What we do is write the chart on Monday. We reread and work with the chart on Tuesday. We then create sentence strips of each child's sentence in that chart. We have kids cut them up so that we can see if they understand what a word is. We reorder, we retape those if we need to. We give kids a couple of chances, and then we show them how to do it if they don't know how. And then we put them in order. We help the kids put them in order or attempt to, and then we go back to the model and fix it if we need to. On Thursday, we do that in a grand way. That is, each kid is given a word from a sentence, and so 3 or 4 kids stand up and try to arrange themselves in sentence order. We compare to the chart. We fix it if we need to. Feels like a huge waste of time to people, but it is a major way that emergent kids can process language in an active way. And then on Friday, we make the book. Each of those days, we're also reading the text that we created over and over in context. Again, a module linked at the bottom on this slide. Next slide. Alphabet and phonological awareness. We're trying to teach letter name, letter shape, and the sound that the letter represents. We try to do that in playful and short activities. We try not to take more than 10 to 15 minutes. I don't know of any existing curriculum that teaches alphabet in ways that are consistent with what we know about from research. And I'll put more of that information on the website. But what we want with the alphabet is we want to, when we're reading storybooks with kids, teachers or parents, we want to do what's called print referencing regularly through the text for emergent kids, where we point out some of the print and help the child become aware of it. There's an M like your name. Oh, you know, that dot at the end, that means that the sentence is done. And so we use jargon in context, we point out things, and over time that print referencing is how emergent kids begin to figure out, oh, we're reading words and they work this way, and there's things on the page that can help me figure it out. We read alphabet books with the kids. There are somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 or 600 at the Tar Heel Reader website. There's a link to that somewhere on these slides. We play games like Go Fish, Concentration, War, Slapjack, any of those familiar card games. We take those blank face cards. There's a link for you. You can get playing cards that have nothing on them. They look like playing cards on the back, but they're white. They're blank on the front. We create alphabet sets, multiple copies of A, multiple copies of B, and then we play Go Fish. And so kids say, do you have an A? And if you don't, you go fish, you pick it up. When you match A's, you lay them down. You just play the game the way the game is played, but with alphabet. Kids love that. We've played that with kids who are 17, 18, 19 years old and who don't know the alphabet and yet have had to have flashcards for the last 10 or 15 years of their life. We do phonological awareness activities, particularly with your population where many of your kids are musically inclined. raps, rhymes, poems, tongue twisters. Again, there's a link to a place for tongue twisters. Songs like Willoughby Wallaby Wobbin, an elephant sat on Robin, Willoughby Wallaby Woo, an elephant sat on you. It's a Raffi song, and there's a link here. But those kinds of activities engage children in playing with phonemes and becoming more aware of how sounds work in our language. And so it's done without direct instruction, more through engaging experience and repetition with variety. Next slide. All right, independent reading, we do this whether, remember, assuming that kids can't read, they're emergent, but we do it anyway because we're building interest and confidence, and it's a great opportunity for us to see what a kid does. Do they hold the book upside down? Do they turn the pages backwards? Do they say something out loud when they're looking at print? Do they ask you to read it to them? How do they interact with that? Do they ignore it? Do they want to go play something else? All of those things help us understand what we need to do to begin to pull the children more into independent reading. Predictable text, like predictable charts, there are lots of books where there's just minimal change on a page. Those kinds of books can move a kid into independence quicker. Single word books, there's a book called Dude. It's the only word in the whole book. And I've watched children read through that book with great enthusiasm and gusto, just saying dude on each page. All of those things feel like reading, move kids into paying attention to print, and we can build on those over time. Next page. Independent writing, we're going to do it whether they can do it or not. Our goal is to build interest and confidence, and it's an opportunity for us to see what a kid knows. Frequently with your kiddos, we find that pencil is not the best way to write, and so we play around with assistive technology or keyboards. A structure that works really well across kids of pretty much any age is either draw a picture or pick a picture, Google Images or something like it. Think about that picture, write down what you think, read it out loud to somebody else, put your name on it, save it. We keep those and they become a collection of writings and we can document growth and look for change over time. Next slide. All right, conventional literacy, 4 other ways of approaching the instruction. Robin, I'm counting on you to tell me when we're stopping. All right, next slide.
I'm watching the clock. You go. You're fine.
All right, guided reading. Our goal is different than shared reading. Our goal in guided reading is increasingly to get kids to increasingly be strategic and independent when they're reading text that gradually is harder and harder and greater variety. We tend to start with stories. I think nonfiction is a really great way to start also, particularly boys as a gender prefer nonfiction, girls as a gender prefer fiction. And so I think we want to take advantage of the odds, about 80-20 in either direction. And so, and there didn't used to be great nonfiction for young readers, beginning readers. There's an enormous variety now. The structure that we use, this assessment that we've been giving, where I showed you the word ID, the language comprehension, the processing or silent reading, we look at the lowest score that the child has on those 3, and we pick text at that level. We pick text at that level because what we want is text that gives the child to apply every skill that that child has. If we pick a text that is, for instance, at the silent reading level, but the child's word identification level is lower, then the child might struggle and read with understanding because that child's strategic or knows something about the topic, but it won't improve that child's word identification by doing so. So we pick text at the lowest of the 3 scores and then help kids read successfully with this structure. We anchor the reading in 2 things. We help the child make connections between what the child knows about the world and what they're about to read. So for reading an animal text, we talk to the child about animals the child's familiar with in ways that the child's about to read about these new animals in this new text. We then set a purpose for reading in this form. All right, I want you to read so that you can. And then we finish that statement in language that the child can understand. So we might, for example, put 3 pictures on the whiteboard and say, we want you to read so that you can put these 3 pictures in the order they occur in the story. Read so that you can tell me 2 characteristics of the main character. Read so that you can read to page 22 so that you can tell me how you think the story's going to end. Always, we're trying to get the child thinking in text while they're reading, because that's what reading comprehension is. You're thinking in text. And so setting a purpose helps the child begin to do that on a regular basis. We then have the child read, and we don't interrupt. So there's a widespread approach, Fountas and Pinnell, that's quite widely used, where they call it guided reading, but it's more like what my colleagues and I would call shared reading. They stop every page or two and they talk with the children about the text. Our goal in guided reading is to help the child become more independent and to read with greater comprehension. Every time you stop a child, you're disrupting comprehension and you're making it harder for that child to become more independent. It's one thing if you're an able-bodied, typically developing reader. It's a whole nother thing if you're struggling with reading. And so when we move from shared reading to guided reading, we're trying to read chunks of text without interruption. As soon as the child finishes the reading, we're then applying from that anchor. So we follow up on that purpose. All right, what was the purpose of reading? Well, you told us you wanted us to put these 3 pictures in the order they occurred. Great, who wants to get us started? Which picture is going to come first? All right, which picture do you think comes second? Which picture comes third? All of that without reference to the text. The book has been closed and we're thinking about the purpose. Once we've thought about the purpose, we go back into the text and we check how we did. We provide informative feedback. So we look back in that text. So we're not doing what classrooms typically do, where we have kids read something and then answer questions. And in answering those questions, they're always looking in the book. That's a study strategy that does not lead you to independent reading comprehension. So it's a useful thing to know and to be able to do. But if we want to help kids learn to read with comprehension, we need to have them doing it. There is a memory component. And I don't have time to get into the theory at this point, but the most common theory at this point in reading comprehension is a man named Kinch, and there is a memory component to developing comprehension. So memory or not, it is important for kids to try and hold that purpose in their head, read that text, try and follow up on that purpose. And in doing that, in text that is at a level they can read, they get better and better at the process. Next slide. With writing, our goal is to help kids learn to communicate their thoughts in increasingly clear ways for a wider and wider variety of audiences, with wider and wider variety of text types, and for a wider and wider variety of purposes. The anchor of our writing approach is what we call writing without standards. We don't correct kids. We have them write. We have them share their writing with us and with each other. We tell them what they did was wonderful, and we ask them to tell us more. Tell me more is then the prompt or the push to write more words. And the more they write, the better they're going to get. We do look at errors of children's writing, but we don't mark them on the paper. We look at them as indicators of what are we going to teach tomorrow. We teach independent revision with core strategies. We publish student writing regularly every couple of weeks to keep children motivated. We have to educate families that you're not going to see perfect writing, but if you'll stick with me for 10 to 15 weeks, that's a big investment, but if you'll stick with me for 10 to 15 weeks, I will show you growth in your child by using this approach. And we publish in all sorts of ways. The wider variety, the better. Next slide. And then word instruction, we're trying to increase sight word vocabulary and the ability when you see a word you don't know to figure it out really efficiently. Tends to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 per 100. When you exceed that, it becomes comprehension tends to suffer. And so we want to have relatively easy text relative to child ability, not easy text generically. We use a word wall for sight words. The best resource for looking at some of these ideas is a paperback. It's going to cost you, I don't know, maybe $10 or $15. That's not much of an investment. I would gamble that if I were trying to teach my child to read. There's a link here where you can look them up. Patricia Cunningham and her colleagues are the author of this series, Month by Month Phonics for kindergarten, Month by Month Phonics for first grade, etc., up through what they call Month by Month Phonics for upper grades. And so depending on the age of your child or and not the age, the reading ability. So if you have a 17-year-old who reads at a first grade level, you want the Month by Month Phonics for first grade. Don't show the child the cover. Use the strategies inside the book. Last thing, we want kids reading widely and independently. Again, that has to be at that level of the lowest of the 3 scores. We encourage and we don't force reading. So if a kid picks a hard book, we don't say, put it back, it's too hard for you. But we try and help that kid make a better choice over time. And so we want kids in materials they can read with success and understanding and build on that. We also know that if we provide extrinsic rewards, we've lost the battle. And so we're doing everything we can to make reading the reward for reading. And so we're pushing for silent reading toward the end of first grade ability and onward. So if you have a child who's 16 who reads at a second grade level out loud, we want to get that child reading silently right away. You've got a 4th grader who reads at a kindergarten level out loud. We're not surprised because most kids in kindergarten read out loud. They haven't yet internalized. They don't have enough sight words. They don't have enough reading fluency to internalize the process of reading. So reading silently tends to be possible toward the end of about first grade level ability. Next slide. We're going to encourage and not force kids to read materials that are relatively easy. I said that in talking about reading with words. We want to read aloud from a wide variety of text to children to show them what's out there, to help them understand possibility. We need books in every room in the school and our house. We need other forms of print. Books are not the only form of reading. 2 sources of easy text you can find online are linked at the end. One is Tar Heel Reader, and that one is for your older beginners or younger beginners, but kids who read, who are emergent, maybe at a kindergarten level, but not much higher. Although if they enjoy them, I'm all for it. StoryShare, again, an online source of free text. K5, it tends to be the range. And again, tend to be written for older kids, but you'll find lots of things there that are that in 5th grade you might be interested in reading if you're a 5th grade reader. It's just that they work really well for older kids who may not read at the same level as their non-disabled peers. Okay, next slide. I didn't put this one in.
I added this quote in. This was me. I love this quote from Pam Allen, and because she talks about the fact that reading is like breathing in and writing is like breathing out. And then she goes on to talk about storytelling and how storytelling is what links both. The big thing for me is that writing and reading are connected, and you can't disconnect those. And historically, for kids with Williams syndrome, because they've had so many mechanical problems with writing, they often don't engage in that part of literacy instruction. Frequently, just logistically in classrooms are sort of exempted from that because they struggle with the handwriting part of it. And the big key piece for me with the writing part of it is our kids need to be a part of composition. They need to understand that letters make words and words make sentences and sentences make stories and ideas, and this is important. And I love this quote. I just think it's really important. That's all. All right, we have about 4 minutes left. David, I was wondering if you could just take a couple of minutes before maybe we dive into, questions if we have time. And since we got started a little bit late, I don't know, David, if you're willing to go for 10 extra minutes are you
I'll,
willing to do this?
I'll stay as long as you'd like me to stay.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. I wonder if you could specifically speak to the sight word question, because I've had a couple of questions come through about that. Because one of the big things that we've said at the WSA is that it's really important that kids with Williams syndrome are taught to read with a phonics-based approach, and that they are not taught with a sight word-based approach. And a lot of that, I think, is specifically pointed at the fact that many times, um, because our kids have a syndrome, they are often placed in classrooms or taught to read using like the Edmark reading program, which is primarily all sight words, and there's no phonics instruction that's part of that curriculum at all. And so I just wonder if you could take a few minutes and really talk about, you know, how sight words fits in the larger picture, and what's your take on that?
Kids have to know sight words and they have to know how to decode. You need both. You can't learn to read at any. So here's an example. Kids who are deaf, congenitally deaf, unless they receive really excellent reading instruction, tend to top out at about a third or fourth grade level because they tend to be taught sight word approaches. Sight word approaches don't take you past about a third grade level of reading, no matter how smart you are, because you'd have no way to figure out new words that you encounter in print. And so you can't learn a large enough sight vocabulary to become a high level reader. So you have to have sight words. Edmark, unfortunately, does only sight words and is the prevailing approach for kids with disabilities of various sorts. I've seen lots of kids with Down syndrome, autism spectrum, and I'm hearing now from you, Williams syndrome, are placed in that curriculum. It is one as a parent I would fight. There are much more efficient ways to teach sight words. I've mentioned word walls and Patricia Cunningham. You can follow up on that. You can look at our website. You can Google that. And so Edmark tends to take 45 minutes to an hour. I think 15 to 30 minutes of word instruction is plenty. And you need other experiences if you can learn to read and write. You do need to decode. I'm not happy with most curricula that are recommended when it comes to decoding. So many of you are, your schools make decisions to place children in approaches that were designed for kids who have dyslexia. There is nothing in any child with Williams syndrome I've met yet that tells me that they have dyslexia. They are garden variety reading difficulties that are explainable and teachable. And so dyslexia is a fairly specific language-based disorder, tends to be around phonological processing, and that's not what I'm seeing in your kids so far. Maybe I'm wrong over the long haul, but right now that's not what I see. So I don't want Orton Gillingham approaches because they're not designed for the needs of your kids. I don't want metalinguistic approaches that kids have to learn rules like Wilson phonics or approaches like that, where you memorize rules in order to learn how to decode, because your children in general have impaired language comprehension. They tend to have difficulties understanding language, and so it makes no sense to use abstract language rules to learn abstract aspects of language, how letters and sounds go together. What I prefer instead are the making words approaches of Patricia Cunningham. And I prefer those because there is minimal jargon, first, second, third, letter names, take one, rearrange. There's a little bit of language, but there's no specialized language. We don't talk about R-controlled vowels. It is based on using real words to spell other real words. So compare contrast strategy. It has a sorting step where once you finish a lesson, you sort for patterns, and it has a transfer step, which no other word curriculum has, and that is using what you learned in that particular day spell new words that you were not taught today. And so pushing that compare contrast. And so I really like that approach because of the minimal rules, meta language, hand gestures, physical gestures. It does nothing to confuse. It works with real letters, real sounds in real words to help kids learn how to read and spell words. So that's my take in a nutshell.
Okay, so if I could just ask a question about that. So I have quite strongly for years now, for several years now, highly recommended Orton Gillingham
Yep.
for our families. I mean, it's the gold standard of phonics instruction, and generally, I mean, that's that's what you generally hear around teaching land, but and we've seen a lot of kids have really, really good results. Kids that maybe were getting, an EdMark program or whatnot. If we get the school, if we say to a school, look, use an Orton Gillingham approach, use this approach, we'll get a kid that has, sometimes 3 or 4 grade levels gain in a single school year.
Wait a minute. So 3 or 4 grade levels gain in
A
silent
single
reading with comprehension or in word decoding?
and word decoding.
Okay, I don't care about that.
Okay.
The outcome measure that matters is because of the way I'm teaching you words, are you becoming a better reader with comprehension? I agree that you can learn Orton Gillingham. I've seen kids who are fabulous decoders. They can't read a lick with understanding. They're locked into the approach and they can't break out of that approach to read fluently with understanding. So every approach works for some kids. I'm not denying
Hmm.
that. Gillingham, I'm sure, is a good solution for some kids. The kids it would work with, based on the way the program is designed, would be kids who have good language comprehension, but their impairment is around phonological, is how letters and sounds work together. They just can't figure out that system. And so Orton Gillingham will help them figure out the system, but they better have good language to do it, or don't expect it to lead to better reading with comprehension. So the measure is not do you learn what you're taught? The measure is what you're taught help you read with comprehension better?
Okay, so if I'm just to clarify, just to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying, it's that, approaches like Orton Gillingham are certainly going to help the kids learn the phonics and do the decoding, but
Yeah,
they may not have any impact on comprehension.
that's right. But if it does, it would be if your child has good language comprehension, they just have trouble identifying words, then Orton Gillingham would be one possibility. Again, it wouldn't be my first choice, but it would be a logical choice for those kids.
Okay, all right. That
So
that's
everything works for somebody, right? Everything works for somebody. Nothing works for everybody. We want to be more thoughtful in matching kids to curricula.
hmm Well, and I have to say, in my experience, with several kids, many many kids that I've worked with, you know, oftentimes when I look at their reading outcomes, it 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 so frequently is tied to the instructional practices.
Right,
You know?
right. And the ed psychologists out there know that is teaching to the test, and when you teach to the test, you invalidated the test. The test that we care about in reading is, does the child read better, more independently, with greater understanding over time because of the instruction we're providing? Nothing else is relevant. Don't care if you get better at word identification if you can't read with better comprehension. Don't care
Okay.
if you get better at fluency if you don't read better with comprehension.
Okay. All right. That's good. That clarifies it for me. Um, you know, I think as we gain more and more knowledge about kids with Williams syndrome and their instructional needs, I mean, and those nuances, it seems to me, attached to those instructional needs. Um, what I care about is how do I help a teacher know how
Yeah,
to teach a kid. That's what I think is so important. I mean, I meet teacher after teacher after teacher all over this country that have a big blue bruise in the middle of their forehead because they're like, I don't understand. I'm trying this and I'm trying this and they're still struggling. And what do I do? And I think, the more that we can get information in the hands of teachers to help create, positive growth for the kids, I mean, it also changes the trajectory of that child's educational career.
agreed.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, if you're willing to stick with me, we have just a couple of questions that maybe we might be able to answer for these families. Our
Sure.
little disclaimer with the questions is that you're only going to hear, we only get a little bit of information about each particular situation. And so we're going to, David will respond to these. You need to understand that these are just ideas to consider. It's not a clinical analysis. It's not a clinical recommendation. And we always ask that you guys get, um, assessments and have people that on the ground where you live that know your child much better with far more information, work with you. So, all right, first question. Go ahead, David.
Next slide.
Oh, it should be there. It said,
I see the question. The answer's on the next slide.
oh, there we go. Aha.
All right. So my answer to the question is use comprehensive emergent or comprehensive conventional frameworks to figure out what your child is not getting or getting at school. So the kids with significant disabilities that I know who became adults who could read really well or even functionally were kids whose moms, in every case, dads were usually what families have done when they have a significant issue is dad has kept his job and mom has quit hers in order to support the child. And so I'm not gender biased, I'm just telling you what I've seen. Moms have gone into schools, they've often taken coffee with them, and they have visited and observed, and whatever the child is not getting, they provide at home. So I know a mom in Orlando whose child in first grade was not getting writing experience, but was getting reading comprehension, was getting some word identification instruction, and they had time to read. Just wasn't being taught anything with writing. So at home they wrote. He was a Disney fanatic, and they pulled up pictures of Disney characters, and he wrote every day at home. And each year she did the same thing. Whatever he was not getting at school, she did with him at home. I think those frameworks tell you what you want to be looking for. You don't always find all those things in good programs. I mean, in programs, and so you can fight, but that fight often takes months or years. Meanwhile, your child needs to be learning, and so we use those frameworks to figure out what works and doesn't work. Another place you can get more information, I tweet, not as nastily as some folks. I tend to tweet things about literacy and communication and technology that supports literacy and communication. I use my @Koppenhaver D is where I am on Twitter. Hashtag #LitDis is what I put on anything relevant to kids with disabilities, including kids with Williams syndrome. We have a Williams syndrome literacy webpage site. We are gradually increasing the information and resources there. You could go there. If you have specific questions about your child, kids you're teaching, you can, there's a contact sheet at that website. You can write your question in as much detail as you think we need, and we'll do our best to answer it. And we'll probably put that answer online so that not just one person gets the answer, but whoever is interested in that kind of information gets it. We'd love to provide your kids an online reading assessment if we haven't already, and answer your question more specifically for your child. Next slide. Okay, this is about reading difficulty and Erlang colored overlays. Next slide. I've got three slides of answers. First thing, some principles to understand if you want kids to read with greater fluency. One, text can easily be too hard. They can hardly be too easy. And so if you want kids to read more fluently, they got to be an easy text. And it can't be too easy. If it could be, People like Robin or me who don't remember not being able to read would not have gotten much better at reading because it was always easy. And I would contend that the kids who read the best are the kids who don't get challenged. We kind of had the reverse metaphor today, and that is we think we have to challenge kids to learn. But reading is a skill, and skills improve when they're practiced successfully. Kids can't practice reading successfully when it's too hard. So that's one principle. The second thing is we want to reconceptualize this notion of readability or text difficulty differently than the way many schools are doing it. So the old view is it was this band. If you look at that striped shirt, we could say you are a third grade level reader based on your test results, or you are a second grade level reader, or if you took the STAR test in the accelerated reader program, you were a 4.2 and we could put you in 4.2 books or whatever. That's a narrow view, and that restricts your choices. What you want is a broader view. So if you conceptualize readability or text difficulty for a kid as the water in that cup, everything at or below water level, everything at or below the level that you can read with understanding is reasonable. So if you're a fourth grade level reader, then I can also put you in third grade books, second grade books, first grade books, kindergarten books, comic books. I can put you in anything that's fourth grade level or easier, and you will get better at reading as long as you're engaged in it. So books can be boring, but they can't be too easy. And you and I know we don't go into bookstores and ask them to give us the hard books because we got a college degree. We go in and we find things that are interesting to us, and often they're easier than our ability. All right, so we want readability to be a broad concept, and it's not a problem if it's easy. Third principle, motivation and interest lead to increased amount of reading. Increased amount of reading leads to increased fluency. And so as long as we don't make reading a battle, don't punish kids for not reading, don't force reading, then we get kids, if we find their interest and find print around their interest, will engage in reading and get better at it. All right, so now more specific response. Next slide. If you want to increase reading fluency, you need to read materials that are relatively easy for you. And so you need to know how well the child reads. And we would go with the lowest of the three numbers. Two sources that are linked somewhere in this presentation are Tar Heel Reader for your emergent readers and StoryShare for your readers who are somewhere between K and 5 in ability. If you're above that, you got an infinite variety of choice. If you know the level your child reads easily, then you can search Tumble Books. Many school systems and many public libraries have Tumble Books, so you can check either of those sources. If you do, Tumble Books are known difficulty, and they help you link, when you find a book that works for your kid, they help you to link other books of that difficulty, other books by that author, etc. Which is a general principle also. If you find an author that your child loves and reads easily, get everything that author wrote and get your child to read it. Fluency used to happen because of the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. Series books. Now we've got a huge number of series books. Amazon, if you go to Amazon, you don't have to buy the books, but if you look at children's books, they provide what's called a Lexile level at Amazon for every children's book. There's a link here. You can go to Lexile to grade level conversion charts, and you can see sort of what a Lexile number means relatively, and then find books at that. So if you're looking for third grade level, find out what the Lexile corresponding numbers are. Find children's books at Amazon that sort of fit in that range. Or if you're not sure, is it fit in that range if you're thinking about it. News ELA is a fabulous website if your child reads at about a second grade level or higher, because it automatically converts text to at least 3 different levels, the same text, information text from magazines and websites, really good, interesting short stories, text, not stories, informational text. And so that's a great resource, and it's free. Schools often purchase it because it also provides, if you buy it, lesson plans and other features. All you want are the text and the ability to convert them to the level your child can read successfully. And then you can search on Google, books at the blank grade level, or books at the blank grade level difficulty. and that will send you to teacher lists, school system lists, scholastic lists, other kinds of lists that people have put together where you can look through titles and find more books at the level that you have found is successful for your child. Remember, it can be too easy. It can't be too hard if you wanted to get more fluent. Next slide. The question about Erlen overlays, there is nothing from a reading perspective that would suggest colored overlays would make a difference in reading. The research on those colored overlays, both Erlen and other systems, suggest in general that they make no difference. Our research, my colleagues and I at Appalachian, on reading profiles doesn't suggest that even if they worked, they would resolve the severity of reading difficulty that we found so far. So don't expect a child who reads words at a second grade level, reads with understanding at a first grade level, and understands language at a third grade level to put a colored overlay on a book and suddenly read at a fifth or sixth or eighth grade level. It's just not going to happen. They might read a little better if it works. On the flip side, they cost $44.95. I looked on Amazon. So, you know, if I've tried everything, it's a relatively inexpensive experiment. But it's not one that I would have high hopes for or expect to work from a reading perspective. Okay,
So
next slide.
I can talk about that from sort of from an occupational therapy perspective. And
Sure.
one of the things that I've seen with the kids with Williams syndrome is that if people use like a blue, a purple, or a green colored overlay, and I go even cheaper. I go to Office Max and get a set of clear plastic tab dividers and just cut the tab off and just use the colored sheet because those are only about $5 and and I just use that. And what I can tell you from an OT perspective that I see with kids is it I don't know, I've never ever thought that it was going to help with the reading level, but it does seem to help with reading stamina. You know, the visual, perceptual, and spatial problems that our kids have, a lot of times they complain of being tired or they complain of headaches, and you know, and some of that might also be due to the reading difficulty, but I do see that we get a little bit of an increase in stamina with an overlay over top of it. Some kids, it's a great thing, it's important to them. Some kids, there's no difference at all.
Yep.
There you go.
Yep. I met one kid I was told had Erlen syndrome. What I found in that he was a college student at Appalachian.
Hmm.
When I assessed him, he had no symptoms. He would get headaches and describe visually moving text and sparkles on the page when he got
Hmm.
tired or found reading fatiguing. He could usually read for somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 60 minutes before that happened. What I found in assessing him was he was symptom free until we hit seventh grade level. And so if a child can read, and we're thinking about an Erlen syndrome, a colored overlay solution, it may also be the case that we want to work on reading fluency at the same time. And we would do that in relatively easy text to keep the symptom-free experience, and over time anticipate that that would raise the level that the child could read before symptoms kicked in.
Hmm. It's
But
that.
that's just an N of one.
Mhm. Mm, interesting. Interesting. Awesome.
Next
All
slide.
right.
Okay, this is the third grade kiddo, multiple issues around Norton Gillingham Sunday reading intervention. Next slide. I said this earlier, Orton Gillingham's designed for classic dyslexia, that is, kids who have strong language, but fairly specific and severe word recognition difficulties. The Sunday program is a derivative, and they acknowledge that. The Williams syndrome reading difficulties that we're finding, the reading difficulties in children with Williams syndrome, are more diverse than true dyslexia profiles. And so I wouldn't go that route, at least not as a first choice. A question I have, however, is your daughter's reading level you had said she reads at a kindergarten level. Is that a measure of reading text with comprehension? So she can read kindergarten level text and understand it, or is that a measure of how she scores on the Sunday test? And if it's a measure of the Sunday test, she's not learning to read, she's just learning what she's being taught. What we want to know is she getting better at reading with understanding? In her case, I would anticipate that would be reading out loud with understanding, because she's reading at a kindergarten level. Most kids at a kindergarten level can't read silently. Next issue, has she participated in our online assessment? And if so, what was her profile or 3 scores? Because that would help me answer your question better. Or sign up and we'll test her and I'll let you know. Then you asked about how long should it take for an intervention to work. Our experience across several hundred kids, not Williams Syndrome specific, is that if we choose a good approach for kids who are in the bottom 25 percentile in grades 1 through 8, we get measurable growth in 10 to 15 weeks. We see observational changes, positive changes, just in affect, success in daily experiences with literacy, willingness to read, etc. We can see things, soft things, in about 6 weeks or so. But in 10 to 15 weeks, we can measure change. And then you asked about how long instruction, typically until kids can read at about a 3rd grade level. Instruction for literacy is usually 1.5 to 2 hours everywhere I've ever been, everything I've ever read in the literature. Intervention is targeted instruction to help a child with a difficulty. Typically, intervention is in the neighborhood of 30 to 45 minutes, and it is supplemental to that instruction. So I would hope that they're not pulling your child out of reading instruction in 3rd grade in order to get her 1 hour a Sunday. If she's getting the Sunday in addition to reading instruction, that's a good decision.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. So this is something that we stress, that I've stressed really strongly, and we recommend for kids with Williams syndrome, is that they get what we affectionately call the double dip. So what we like is for them to have double language arts instruction. We want them, in the general education classroom for the entire literacy block. And then, they can also get supplemental intervention. For some kids, it's with a reading specialist. For other kids, it's with a special education teacher. But that's one of the things that we've recommended really strongly at the WSA for several years now, is that kids get a double dip of literacy.
I believe that was the last question, but I'm not certain.
I think it was.
There are resources, and they have this handout, correct? Or access to it? Okay.
Yep.
So just briefly, our website, and if you have questions like what we're talking about tonight and others, please use that comment form. We'll be happy to try and respond and build that website around your needs. We have a book out called Comprehensive Literacy for All. It is about teaching students with significant disabilities to read and write. There's a link to where you can find that. The Tar Heel Reader website is easy books for older readers in general, but young kids like it too. It was just designed as a source of easy text for older kids who read at beginning levels or who are emergent. The password, you don't need to use the site if you just want to read. But if you want to write your own for the kids you're working with, then you need a password. I'm going to tell it to you. And you're going to promise never to publish this password anywhere. This website has existed and not been hit by any evildoers since 2007. So it would get hit by evildoers as soon as somebody who shouldn't have the password has the password. And so don't write it anywhere. Don't put it in a newsletter. Don't put it online. You may share it orally with anybody you think would benefit. The password you need the first time is literacy with a capital L, followed by an exclamation point. Literacy exclamation point gets you into the site and allows you to create your own free account. So there is no charge for using Tar Heel Reader. And the only reason you need the password would be to write your own materials. Great site. Story Shares K5, link there. I think there's another page. Yeah, Karen and I are doing a conventional literacy course. So if you had 4 yeses and your kid's struggling, you might think about that. We're doing that in October in Denver. Karen and David Yoder and I created a literacy bill of rights. Jane Farrell has a nice link to a poster of that. And you could take a look at that. But those are things that you could think about whether your child is receiving in school and might further the discussion around helping kids learn to read. I appreciate your time. You all are troopers to hang in there till almost 10:30. So
Yeah,
three.
it's amazing. So, David, we just can't thank you enough. I just want to reiterate to everyone, please know that, as we are beginning to learn more and more about how kids with Williams syndrome learn and interventions that work with them, we're going to continue to build our body of knowledge. And, we are always in a know better, do better situation. So, every little bit of information is something that we have to sort of assemble and test and look at from 6 different ways. And, then we pile that information on other knowledge we have, and we continue to, move things forward. David and I are actually going to Germany in next month in March to talk with some researchers from all over the world about anything non-medical to do with Williams syndrome. So lots of education things, behavior things, and those types of things, nothing medical. So we'll be able to, I'll be hopefully bringing back more information and more things that we're learning that might also help us help kids right here in America. So again, thank you guys for joining us. This was a really long session tonight, but I think it was super valuable. The recording will be up on the WSA website. So you can go back and listen to it again if that's what you want to do. And as always, feel free to email me if you have questions. My email is simply rpegg@williams-syndrome.org. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful night.